In the pursuit of flight, humanity learned to defy gravity, but not greed. Every innovation that lifted us higher also brought us closer to risk. When competition became obsession and safety became secondary, one decision changed the course of modern aviation forever. This is the story of how ambition soared beyond control, and how the sky itself became a warning. Part 1. The Race for the Skies for Eto'o. More than a century, human flight has been the ultimate expression of progress. The airplane transformed distance into illusion, connecting continents and compressing time. What once took weeks by sea could now be crossed in hours. The sky became a symbol of possibility, of freedom, ambition, and mastery over nature. But in the modern age, that freedom came with a cost. The race to conquer the air became a race for dominance, and with dominance came pressure. In the decades following the jet revolution, commercial aviation evolved from a marvel of engineering into a fiercely competitive business. Airlines demanded faster delivery, lower costs, and greater efficiency. Passengers wanted cheaper tickets and seamless travel. Governments, investors, and shareholders measured success not in innovation, but in quarterly profit. The dream of flight was no longer about exploration. It was about economics. Aviation engineers once designed planes for longevity, redundancy, and stability. Every decision was guided by a single principle: safety above all. But as global demand exploded, that ideal began to strain under the weight of market expectations. To survive, manufacturers had to deliver more aircraft, faster, and at lower prices. What had been an industry of experimentation slowly became an industry of optimization. Each new design promised smaller gains, slightly quieter engines, marginally lower fuel consumption, modest improvements in comfort. But behind each of those promises was a battle of financial endurance. As technology advanced, the competition grew more intense. The arrival of digital flight systems, composite materials, and new engine designs ushered in an era of unprecedented innovation. Yet those same innovations came with immense complexity. Each advancement required integration with existing fleets, retraining of pilots, and recertification by regulators. To airlines, time spent waiting for new technology meant lost revenue. To manufacturers, it meant lost market share. Speed was no longer measured in knots. It was measured in deadlines. Inside design offices and boardrooms, the language of aviation began to change. Engineers still spoke of lift and drag, but executives spoke of market segments, cost curves, and delivery schedules. The emphasis shifted from creating the best airplane to creating the most profitable one. In this new environment, efficiency became both a goal and a trap. Every fraction of a percent saved in fuel, weight, or production cost could mean millions gained or lost in annual revenue. And so began the era of relentless iteration. Faster, cheaper, lighter. The global market rewarded boldness. Airlines pushed manufacturers to promise performance targets that bordered on impossible. In response, those manufacturers leaned on decades of accumulated trust, assuring customers and regulators that they could deliver. The culture of confidence that had once inspired daring innovation slowly evolved into a culture of assumption. Systems were tested, but often within the narrow limits of expectation. What had once been a discipline defined by caution became one defined by certainty. Meanwhile, the public continued to see aviation as the pinnacle of safety. For decades, accident rates had declined steadily, and each new generation of aircraft appeared more reliable than the last. The statistics were reassuring, and the industry's image remained untarnished. Behind that image, however, the business of building airplanes had become a delicate balance between engineering integrity and financial survival. Margins were shrinking, investors were demanding growth, and the room for error, financial or technical, was closing fast. In this environment, risk took on a new meaning. It was no longer confined to aerodynamics or materials. It was embedded in decision-making itself. Choosing which systems to redesign, which to reuse, and which to automate became questions of strategy rather than pure engineering. Software began to replace hardware solutions, allowing changes to be implemented quickly and cheaply. The airplane of the future would not be defined solely by its shape, but by the code that guided it. The integration of digital control brought remarkable efficiency, but it also introduced a new dependency on algorithms invisible to the human eye. Pilots were still in command, yet increasingly, they were managing systems rather than flying the machine. Automation reduced workload but also reduced familiarity. The bond between pilot and aircraft, once defined by instinct and skill, was being rewritten by screens and sensors. And with each new update, the complexity deepened. The pursuit of profit accelerated these changes. Development cycles shortened, design reviews compressed, and production targets tightened. Engineers found themselves navigating the tension between ideal design and feasible delivery. Small compromises, accepted in isolation, accumulated into systemic ones. In most cases, those compromises posed no threat. But in aviation, even the smallest oversight can ripple outward with catastrophic consequence. Across the industry, a quiet understanding emerged. Success depended not only on innovation, but on perception. Airlines needed to believe that the next generation of aircraft would be safer, cheaper, and easier to operate. Regulators needed to believe that certification processes remained rigorous. Passengers needed to believe that flight was still the safest form of travel. Maintaining that belief became a collective effort, a delicate choreography of confidence that kept the system aloft. For the companies at the center of this ecosystem, the stakes could not have been higher. A single design could determine the fate of tens of thousands of jobs and billions in contracts. The introduction of a new aircraft was not just an engineering milestone, it was an existential bet. A success could define a generation. A failure could define a legacy. The late 2000s marked a turning point. Fuel prices surged, environmental regulations tightened, and competitors unveiled increasingly efficient models. The pressure to respond was immense. The demand was clear: deliver a new aircraft that could match or surpass the competition without disrupting existing operations. Airlines wanted innovation without retraining pilots, performance without higher cost, and delivery without delay. It was a paradox only solvable through compromise. As deadlines approached, internal discussions within design teams across the world grew more urgent. Should they reinvent the airplane from the ground up, or modify an existing platform to save time and money? Each option carried risk. A new design meant longer development and stricter testing. A modification promised faster results, but required perfect integration of new systems into old frameworks. The decision would determine not only market share, but the moral compass of an entire organization. In the end, history would remember the outcome not as a technical milestone, but as a warning. The race for the skies had become a race against restraint. What began as competition for innovation had transformed into competition for survival. The boundaries between ambition and arrogance blurred until they were indistinguishable. The sky, once humanity's symbol of limitless possibility, had become a mirror reflecting its own limitations. As night fell over production lines and control towers, the hum of progress continued. Engineers refined their models, executives reviewed forecasts, and investors awaited returns. Everyone believed they were building the future. No one imagined how fragile that future could be. And somewhere above the clouds, the unspoken truth lingered. In aviation, every shortcut taken on the ground eventually finds its way back into the sky. Part 2. The cost of speed has always defined aviation. The first pilots measured it in knots and altitude. Modern industry measures it in quarters and contracts. The faster an aircraft can be built, certified, and delivered, the faster it can begin earning money. Time, once the enemy of flight, became its currency. In workshops and design offices around the world, the rhythm of progress beats against the clock. Schedules expand on spreadsheets, deadlines tighten in meetings, and every adjustment ripples through the system. Engineers know that every extra day means cost. Managers know that every delay means market loss. The push to deliver sooner becomes a constant hum, an invisible pressure threading through every decision. At the heart of that pressure lies a paradox. Aviation demands perfection, yet perfection resists haste. Each component, each sensor, each line of code must function flawlessly under forces that punish error. The margin for failure is measured not in percentages, but in lives. Still, in the calculus of modern business, caution competes with velocity. What once required years of incremental testing is now expected within months. The process begins innocently enough. A redesign here, a software update there, a change that saves a few hours on the production floor, a simplification that avoids retraining. Each adjustment, viewed alone, appears efficient and harmless. But layered together over time, those efficiencies form a pattern, a quiet erosion of margin. The pursuit of speed, disguised as progress, becomes the slow rewriting of risk. Inside every major engineering program, two clocks tick in parallel. One counts down to delivery. The other measures the patience required for verification. When the first clock wins, the second clock is forced to adapt. Testing windows shrink, review boards compress, and paperwork replaces debate. The language of certainty takes the place of doubt. It is not deception. It is survival in a market that rewards momentum over reflection. The culture that grows around speed is subtle. It does not shout. It whispers. Teams begin to celebrate the miracle of catching up, of meeting impossible targets. Late nights become normal. Warnings become noise. Success is measured by endurance rather than insight. In that atmosphere, even the most conscientious engineer can begin to believe that compromise is courage. History shows that technological progress often accelerates until restraint intervenes. In aviation, restraint usually arrives after loss. The first generation learns by daring. The second learns by remembering. Yet in a global industry worth hundreds of billions, memory fades quickly. New teams replace old. Deadlines return, and the cycle begins again. Speed also changes communication. Complex design choices, once discussed in open rooms, become filtered through layers of management and metrics. The language of engineers, precision, probability, verification, must compete with the language of finance, timeline, revenue, shareholder value. Both are necessary, but they rarely speak in harmony. Between them lies a quiet translation error. The assumption that what can be built quickly can also be built safely. Automation deepened this tension. Software made it possible to adjust performance after production, promising agility that physical redesigns could never match. But code written in weeks often replaces mechanisms refined over decades. The new flexibility conceals a fragile dependency. Every fix invites another. When speed dictates release, updates become the new testing, and the real laboratory is the open sky. The drive for efficiency does not come from malice. It grows from ambition, the same ambition that once taught humanity to fly. No one enters the field of aviation to take shortcuts. They enter to solve problems that seem unsolvable. But ambition under pressure changes character. It becomes competitive, defensive, impatient. And when an organization's pride rests on its ability to deliver faster than anyone else, slowing down can feel like failure. Within that mindset, warning signs are rarely ignored outright. They are deferred, contextualized, balanced against probabilities. It's unlikely. We'll address it in the next update. Every design has trade-offs. These are the quiet sentences that mark the thin line between progress and risk. They do not sound reckless. They sound reasonable. That is what makes them dangerous. The cost of speed is cumulative. It is measured not only in dollars or hours, but in the gradual loss of skepticism, the discipline that once defined engineering itself. Skepticism slows things down. It asks too many questions, demands too many tests. In a culture obsessed with acceleration, doubt becomes the enemy. But in aviation, doubt is safety. It is the pause that prevents disaster. Across the industry, countless professionals continue to fight for that pause. They design redundancies, demand simulations, insist on reviews. Most of the time, their vigilance prevails, and the world never hears their names. But occasionally, the balance tips. A schedule overrides a warning. A deadline outruns a doubt, and the price of speed becomes visible for all to see. When tragedy follows haste, investigations look backward through the layers of decision that led there. Rarely do they find a single villain. Instead, they reveal a network of incentives, a culture shaped by urgency and faith in its own competence. Each choice makes sense in isolation. Together, they form a chain that no one intended to build. The lesson that emerges is not new. In flight, every shortcut eventually demands repayment. Whether that payment comes in cost overruns, reputational damage, or worse, it cannot be avoided. The air has no patience for optimism. It rewards only precision. As the global appetite for travel grows, the temptation to repeat old mistakes grows with it. Passengers expect speed not only in flight, but in innovation. Investors expect growth without interruption. Regulators face the impossible task of keeping pace with technology that evolves faster than policy. Everyone, in some way, is caught in the same momentum. The solution is not to slow the world down, but to remember why it must sometimes pause. Progress that ignores its own rhythm eventually loses control of it. The fastest way forward, paradoxically, is often to stop, to test, to question, to breathe. When the engines roar and the aircraft lifts into the sky, its passengers rarely think of the thousands of hours that made that moment possible. They trust that every bolt, every circuit, every line of code has earned its place through scrutiny. That trust is sacred. It is the invisible contract between humanity and its machines. To honor it requires patience, even when patience is expensive. In the quiet between takeoff and landing lies a truth as old as flight itself. Velocity without balance is descent by another name. The challenge of modern aviation, and perhaps of progress itself, is to remember that the sky may forgive delay, but it never forgives complacency. Part 3. The system of trust. Modern aviation runs on trust. Not the casual kind that passes between strangers, but a carefully constructed architecture of confidence that links every element of flight. Engineers trust the math that keeps an aircraft stable. Pilots trust the instruments that translate that math into motion. Regulators trust that every test reflects reality. And passengers, without reading a single report, trust that all of it works together. That system was built slowly, over decades of success and failure. Each investigation, each improvement, added another layer of assurance. When a plane lifts from the runway, it carries more than fuel and cargo. It carries the weight of countless agreements between companies and governments, between data and judgment, between human beings and the machines they've created. It is an ecosystem of belief reinforced by performance. In its earliest days, this trust was personal. Test pilots knew the engineers by name, and the distance between a drawing board and a cockpit could be measured in footsteps. As aviation expanded, that intimacy gave way to process. Certification replaced handshake, documentation replaced instinct. The system became larger, safer, and more abstract. Trust was institutionalized. Yet the further it spread, the easier it became to forget what held it together. Every layer of modern flight depends on validation from another. The manufacturer certifies the design. Regulators verify compliance. Airlines train crews to operate within those limits. Each step assumes the integrity of the previous one. When any link weakens, the others stretch to compensate. Most of the time they hold, But when the strain is too great, the invisible network reveals its fragility. Inside this web, data became the new currency of credibility. Simulations, tests, and analyses replaced physical prototypes. On paper, everything could be proven. In practice, the complexity of modern systems made total understanding impossible for any one person. No engineer could grasp every line of code. No inspector could review every scenario. The system had grown too vast for complete certainty, and so it relied on distributed confidence, each expert trusting the next. That reliance is both strength and weakness. It allows for extraordinary scale, but it also creates blind spots. When assumptions are shared widely enough, they start to feel like facts. "It worked before" becomes the quiet justification for "it will work again." Over time, caution turns procedural. The act of verifying becomes a ritual rather than a conversation. Checklists replace curiosity. For pilots, that trust is lived moment by moment. They depend on systems designed by people they will never meet. They believe that warnings will appear when needed, that redundancies will function if one layer fails. Each takeoff is an act of faith disguised as routine. In thousands of cockpits every day, that faith is rewarded. Flights land safely, and the chain holds. But trust, like any structure, is invisible until it breaks. When cracks appear, they rarely start with a dramatic event. They begin with small signals, an anomaly dismissed as minor, a report lost among thousands, a question postponed for a later meeting. Each seems insignificant, yet each erodes the foundation. What makes the system resilient also makes it vulnerable: its interdependence. When one assumption slips, the rest lean inward, disguising the weakness until something gives way. Regulators face their own dilemma. They are tasked with ensuring safety without stifling innovation. To do so, they often rely on information provided by the very organizations they oversee. Cooperation replaces confrontation. It is efficient, but efficiency and vigilance are uneasy allies. The line between partnership and dependence is easy to cross and difficult to see. In this environment, documentation becomes the language of reassurance. Thousands of pages confirm that everything meets standard, yet those pages can obscure as much as they reveal. The absence of contradiction begins to look like proof. Over time, the system teaches itself to trust paper more than people. The culture surrounding flight reinforces this dynamic. Success is measured by the absence of failure. Each uneventful landing adds to the belief that the system works perfectly, that every risk has already been solved. But safety is not a destination, it is a practice. It must be renewed constantly, questioned constantly. When routine becomes tradition, vigilance fades into habit. For those within the industry, maintaining that vigilance is exhausting work. Engineers must question their own designs. Auditors must challenge colleagues, and pilots must report anomalies that might never reappear. It requires humility, the willingness to admit that the system, no matter how advanced, remains fallible because its creators are human. Technology has not eliminated this need. It has intensified it. Automated systems reduce human error, but also reduce human awareness. The better a system performs, the less people watch it. Trust turns to dependence. And when dependence replaces understanding, even a small failure can feel like betrayal. Yet trust itself is not the enemy. It is the only reason flight is possible. No society could build or operate a global network of machines without it. The challenge is maintaining trust without surrendering scrutiny. That balance between faith and doubt, cooperation and oversight, is the invisible maintenance work of aviation. When it fails, rebuilding it takes years. After every crisis, the same pattern repeats. Committees form, lessons are written, new procedures introduced. The cycle of reassurance begins again. But the real repair happens quietly, in the mindset of the people who design, certify, and fly. They must choose to see trust not as comfort, but as responsibility. To be trusted is to be accountable to everyone who steps on board. In the end, the system of trust is both the industry's greatest achievement and its greatest vulnerability. It allows millions to fly safely every day, but it also depends on an honesty that must never be assumed. Each time an aircraft lifts into the air, it carries that fragile balance, the sum of human confidence and human caution, suspended between sky and earth. The sky remains the final test of integrity. It accepts no explanations, no paperwork, no promises. It reflects only what is true, and in that reflection, the system of trust must constantly see itself, renew itself, and prove itself worthy of belief. Part 4. The breaking point. Every system has a breaking point. It is rarely a single instant of failure. More often, it is the slow accumulation of strain, small compromises, overlooked signals, and misplaced confidence building silently until the balance collapses. In aviation, those moments are rare, but when they arrive, they reveal everything that has been hidden beneath efficiency and trust. Inside control rooms and design offices, people sense tension long before the outside world does. Numbers stop matching. Test results contradict expectations. Schedules tighten past reason. The symptoms appear ordinary at first, lost in the constant noise of progress. But somewhere, someone knows that a threshold is approaching. They feel it in the unease that settles over meetings, in the tone of late-night emails, in the quiet looks exchanged between colleagues who understand the stakes. The danger in complex systems is not that people ignore problems, it is that they normalize them. When issues arise repeatedly without visible consequence, they lose their urgency. The first time a warning light flickers, it draws attention. The 10th time, it becomes background. Each unpunished deviation reinforces the illusion that the system is unbreakable. Complacency does not announce itself. It accumulates. Pressure distorts judgment. In the race to meet goals, to deliver, to compete, the line between acceptable risk and reckless optimism becomes blurred. Each department sees only its piece of the puzzle, convinced that someone else is watching the whole picture. The result is a quiet fragmentation of responsibility. Everyone does their job. No one owns the outcome. Communication, once the strength of safety culture, begins to fracture under the weight of urgency. Reports are delayed, questions softened, problems reframed as challenges to be managed rather than warnings to be heeded. The language changes. Technical words become business terms, and the focus shifts from cause to timeline. The narrative of progress must be protected, even from inconvenient truth. Within this environment, mistakes evolve from singular errors into patterns. A software revision pushed without full review. A sensor assumed reliable because it always has been. A decision justified by the pressure of schedule. Each link appears strong enough until it is tested in motion, at altitude, under conditions no simulation could fully predict. When it finally breaks, the failure looks sudden. But those who know the system understand that it began long before the headline. After any crisis, investigators trace the chain backward, through design notes, meeting minutes, approval forms. They find no villains, only decisions that made sense at the time. They uncover how ambition clouded caution, how success dulled skepticism. They see how people trusted processes that were meant to protect them, unaware that those processes had slowly become rituals instead of safeguards. The tragedy of complex systems is that they fail exactly as they are designed to succeed, by following their own logic too faithfully. For the public, the breaking point is a moment of shock. Images on a screen, names in a report, questions about how something so advanced could go so wrong. For those inside, it is heartbreak and recognition. The very people who dedicated their lives to precision and safety realized that the system they built turned against them. The machine that once symbolized human triumph becomes a monument to human fallibility. What follows is always the same. Grief, investigation, reform. The world demands answers, and answers arrive, often too late to matter. Recommendations are written, standards tightened, and a new generation promises that it will never happen again. Yet behind every reform lies an uncomfortable truth. No checklist can eliminate the flaws that begin in culture. Procedures can be rewritten, but the will to question, to slow down, to resist the momentum of success, must be renewed daily. In the aftermath, industries rediscover humility. Engineers return to first principles, re-examining assumptions that once seemed sacred. Regulators revisit their independence, learning again that cooperation without scrutiny becomes complicity. Pilots relearn systems they once took for granted. Slowly, painfully, the network of trust rebuilds itself. But the scars remain, etched into the history of flight as a reminder that progress without pause is peril. The breaking point changes everyone it touches. For the survivors, it redefines the meaning of responsibility. For the public, it reshapes confidence. And for those who lead, it offers a moment of reckoning. They must face the reality that innovation and accountability are not opposites. They are partners. To build safely is not to move slowly. It is to move wisely. As time passes, the noise fades. The industry returns to its rhythm. New models are announced, new records set. The lessons are absorbed into manuals and training. The names of the lost become statistics in safety reports. Progress resumes. Yet, in quiet moments, in the minds of those who remember, the breaking point still echoes. It whispers a question that has no easy answer. How much risk is acceptable in the name of advancement? That question extends beyond aviation. It belongs to every field where human ambition meets complexity. Medicine, energy, technology, even daily life. The same pattern repeats. Small gains pursued without pause. Safeguards eroded by confidence. Systems trusted because they work until they don't. The cost is always the same. The rediscovery of limits. The sky, indifferent and eternal, watches these cycles unfold. It has seen humanity climb higher with each generation, inventing miracles and repeating mistakes. Each time, the lesson is rediscovered. That perfection is not a state, but a discipline. And that safety is not the absence of failure, but the presence of vigilance. In the silence after disaster, engineers stand on runways looking upward, knowing that the work of restoration begins not in metal or code, but in mindset. They rebuild, recalibrate, recommit. Because flight, at its core, is an act of faith. Faith in physics, in design, and in each other. When that faith is tested, it can either collapse or evolve. The breaking point, though tragic, becomes the moment when faith learns humility. When the engines roar again and the aircraft climbs through the clouds, the world sees only the return of normalcy. But those who understand know that every ascent carries memory within it. Every rivet and line of software whispers the same promise. This time, we remember. This time, we pause. This time, the lesson will hold. And somewhere between the earth and the sky, where gravity and aspiration negotiate their fragile truce, humanity continues to test its limits, hoping that each breaking point brings it closer not just to progress, but to wisdom. Part 5. The Lessons in the Sky. Every age of flight ends with reflection. When the engines go silent and the world takes stock, the same realization returns. Technology alone is never the hero of progress. The real measure of advancement is the wisdom to use it well. From the first fragile gliders to the sleek airliners that cross oceans in a single stretch, aviation has been a dialogue between courage and caution. Each generation inherits the discoveries and the errors of the one before. The equations grow, more precise, the systems more intricate, but the principle never changes. Flight demands humility. Gravity is patient, and it waits for arrogance. After every tragedy, the industry rebuilds not just machines, but meaning. Engineers study data until numbers become stories. Regulators rewrite standards line by line. pilots review procedures that once felt routine. Out of grief comes renewal, and out of renewal comes vigilance. Progress, in its purest form, is the ability to remember. The lesson is simple, but it resists simplicity. Safety is not the absence of danger, but the presence of integrity. It lives in the questions people choose to ask, even when the answers seem obvious. It lives in the willingness to challenge what success looks like, to slow down when every incentive says, hurry. Aviation has taught humanity more than how to fly. It has taught what it means to share responsibility. Every passenger, every controller, every mechanic, every executive is connected by invisible threads of trust. When those threads hold, millions move safely through the sky each day. When they fray, the whole world feels the drop. In boardrooms and hangars, on runways and in simulators, that awareness endures. The pursuit of profit, efficiency, or prestige will always exist, but so will the memory of what happens when they eclipse vigilance. The challenge is to keep memory stronger than momentum. The future of flight will not look like the past. New fuels, autonomous systems, and artificial intelligence promise to change the very meaning of a cockpit. Yet the essence of the lesson remains unchanged. No matter how advanced the technology becomes, it will always depend on human judgment, the capacity to question, to empathize, to act with care. The sky still invites humanity to reach higher, but it also reminds it to look inward. Progress and restraint must rise together, or not at all. The same force that lifts an aircraft into the air also waits to bring it back down. Between those two truths lies the narrow margin of discipline that defines the future. Someday, historians will look back on this era not only for its machines, but for its mindset. They will see an age that learned, again and again, that innovation without reflection is just acceleration. The true legacy of aviation will not be measured in altitude or speed, but in understanding. The recognition that every advance must serve life, not risk it. When a jet carves its path across the twilight sky, its contrail glows for only a moment before fading into the air. Yet for those who look up, that moment means something. Evidence that humanity continues to rise despite its flaws. Learning, adjusting, remembering. The sound of engines becomes a reminder that progress and fragility share the same space. And so, the story closes where it began, with trust. Not blind faith, but earned confidence, built from questioning, learning, and rebuilding. Every flight that departs today carries within it the lessons written by those that came before. Each safe landing is an unspoken tribute to those lessons kept. The sky is vast, but its memory is precise. It records every triumph and every mistake. In its silence, it offers one enduring truth. Progress is not about conquering the air, but about understanding what it asks of us. As long as humanity remembers that, the sky will remain not a warning, but a promise.